Hello and welcome to another episode of Open Conversations. I'm your host Aryan, and today we're diving into a topic that many people shy away from, but it's crucial for building healthy and fulfilling relationships. We're talking about how to communicate your sexual needs effectively. Joining me today is a very special guest, Deepika Saha. Deepika is a young Indian Bengali housewife who believes in the importance of open and honest communication in relationships. Deepika, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here and talk about this topic that's so important, but often overlooked in our society.
So let's start with the basics. Why do you think communicating sexual needs is so important in a relationship, especially in the context of marriage or long-term partnerships?
That's a great question. I believe that open communication about sexual needs is essential because intimacy is a core part of any romantic relationship. When we avoid these conversations, it can lead to misunderstandings, frustration, or even resentment. But when we communicate, we build trust, deepen emotional connections, and ensure both partners feel valued and satisfied.
Absolutely. And I think many people struggle with these conversations because of societal taboos or fear of judgment. Have you noticed that too?
Definitely. In many cultures, including ours, sex is still considered a taboo topic. Women, especially, often feel hesitant to express their desires because they're afraid of being judged or misunderstood. But I believe it's time to break those barriers.
Let's talk about those barriers. What do you think stops people from openly discussing their sexual needs, and how can they overcome these obstacles?
Fear of judgment is a big one, as I mentioned earlier. Another is the lack of knowledge or language to express these feelings. Many people simply don't know how to start the conversation. To overcome this, I'd suggest starting small. Maybe bring up the topic during a relaxed moment. It's also important to approach it with empathy, understanding that it's a sensitive subject for both partners.
That's great advice. So what would you say to someone who's afraid their partner might react negatively?
I'd say frame it positively. Instead of focusing on what's missing, talk about what you enjoy and what could make it even better. For example, instead of saying, I don't like when you do this, say, I really love it when you do that. Positive reinforcement makes the conversation feel less like criticism and more like collaboration.
That's a great point. Now, could you share some practical tips for our listeners on how they can communicate their sexual needs effectively?
Of course, here are a few tips. 1, choose the right time and place. Make sure you're both relaxed and in a comfortable setting. Avoid bringing it up during a conflict. 2, use I statements. Focus on your feelings and needs rather than blaming your partner. For example, say, I feel closer to you when we, instead of you never. 3, be honest but gentle. Be clear about what you want, but phrase it in a way that shows respect for your partner's feelings. 4, be open to feedback. Communication is a two-way street. Listen to your partner's needs as well. 5, seek help if needed. If it's difficult to have these conversations, consider seeing a therapist or counselor together.
Those are fantastic tips. I especially love the idea of using I statements. It makes the conversation feel less confrontational.
But before we wrap up, let's talk about the bigger picture. How can we, as a society, break the stigma around talking about sexual needs?
I think it starts with education. We need to normalize conversations about sex and intimacy, starting with schools, families, and communities. Media and platforms like this podcast also play a huge role in creating safe spaces for these discussions. The more we talk about it, the less taboo it becomes.
Absolutely. Normalizing these conversations can create a ripple effect and help people build healthier relationships. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights. I'm sure our listeners found this conversation as enlightening as I did.
Thank you. It was wonderful to be here and talk about such an important topic. I hope this helps people feel more confident about communicating with their partners.
Thank you. And to our listeners, remember, communication is key to any successful relationship. Don't be afraid to express yourself and listen to your partner. If you found today's episode helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.